Welcome back. We're picking up where we left off.
Right in the ashes.
Yeah, right in the ashes. We left Job sitting in the refuse. His three friends had finally broken a 7-day silence.
And Job himself had just cursed the day of his birth.
Exactly. So today we are going to enter the massive central stretch of the text. We will look closely at chapters 4 through 27.
Which is really the core of the debate.
It is. This section consists of 3 distinct dialogue cycles between Job and his 3 friends. And those friends, just to remind you, are Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar.
And we are going to look at these cycles sequentially because the sequence itself makes an argument.
Right, it's not just random speeches.
No, not at all. We walk through cycle 1 first. That covers chapters 4 through 14. Then we move into cycle 2. That covers 15 through 21.
And finally, cycle 3, which spans 22 through 27.
Right.
As we move through this sequence, you will notice a specific structural pattern. The friends take turns speaking. Joe answers each one individually.
It's very rhythmic.
It is, but I want to signal right up front that this pattern eventually breaks down. By the third cycle, the speeches go missing, they become abruptly short, the structure fractures.
It completely falls apart.
Yeah, and we will spend significant time today on the pivot point that sits right in the middle of this breakdown. That pivot happens in Job 19. It is the moment Job declares, "I know that my Redeemer liveth."
Which is such a famous line.
We will unpack what that means in its original ancient Near Eastern context. But first, we really need to set the scene. We need to look at the narrative stakes. We have to understand what is actually happening in those ashes.
Right, because the environment here is just raw. We're in the ancient Near East. Job is physically ruined. He sits in the refuse outside his settlement.
Basically the town dump.
Yeah, literally the dump. He has lost his children. He has lost his wealth and his health. All of this vanished within a matter of days.
Just a total collapse.
And his 3 friends traveled from the respective regions. They saw him, and they failed to recognize him at first.
Which is terrifying.
It is. His physical deterioration was that severe. Then they sat with him in complete silence for a week.
And when that silence breaks, the rhythm of the ensuing debate is relentless. It is a highly structured, escalating confrontation.
Very escalating.
The friends speak, Job responds, another friend speaks, Job responds again. We are watching a man who has experienced total catastrophic loss.
And he is colliding with the dominant cultural worldview of his time.
Right, this is abstract theology meeting raw physical grief.
Yeah.
Job is in agony, and his friends bring him an inherited system of thought.
Which forces us to pivot here. We need to move from the immediate narrative stakes to the analytical framework.
Because the literary structure shapes the dialogue, right?
Exactly. We need to understand the mechanics of the poetry itself to understand what these friends are saying. I mean, the scholar Robert Alter writes extensively on biblical parallelism.
Right, and in English poetry, we usually look for rhyme or meter.
But in Hebrew poetry, the primary engine is parallelism. A line makes a statement, and the second line responds to it.
Alter points out that the poet of Job uses a specific kind of parallelism, though. This is not just synonymous repetition.
Right. It's not just saying the same thing twice.
Exactly. The second line does not simply repeat the first line in slightly different words. The poet uses what Alter calls focusing or intensifying parallelism.
So the second line sharpens the first. It narrows it. It escalates it.
And that structural choice has massive consequences. It means there is a constant building of argumentative pressure. It builds line by line.
The poetry itself is inherently confrontational.
Yes, it is escalating. It does not allow the reader to rest in repeated formulas. The form actually does the argumentative work.
Which we see when we look at the content of the argument. We have to look at how the friends are presented. Carol Newsom advances an approach that reads this text as genuinely polyphonic.
Let us pause on that term for a second. Polyphonic means there are multiple independent voices.
And each voice carries real weight.
Right. The friends are not just cartoon villains. If we read them as obvious villains, the text just becomes a boring echo chamber.
Newsom argues exactly that. The friends are not strawmen. They represent a coherent, culturally dominant theology. They make a real claim on the reader's sympathy.
Because they articulate the system of retributive theology.
Yeah, which is the underlying belief system of their world. Righteousness consistently equals prosperity. Sin consistently equals suffering.
It is a system that says the moral order of the universe is fundamentally transactional. Actions have predictable, measurable consequences.
And William Brown writes about the social context of this wisdom. This retributive framework was cultivated by scribes. Sages and professional wisdom teachers developed it.
It is based on centuries of observable societal function.
Right. It is not just naive cruelty. The friends speak with the confidence of a professional class. They have observed how a well-ordered society tends to operate.
I mean, a society needs rules. Actions need consequences.
We see parallels to this in other ancient texts, too. David Kleins points out the connection to the Babylonian Theodicy.
Which is another dialogue between a sufferer and a friend, right?
Exactly. Kleins notes that Job takes this regional literary framework and expands it, becomes an unresolved, multi-cycle conflict. It is a sustained battle.
An inherited system battles a stubborn, singular case. Job just refuses to fit the mold.
He really does.
Let me push back on a common assumption we make today, though. We often hear the phrase Job's comforters. We use it as shorthand for hypocritical people.
Right. People giving terrible advice.
But we really must recognize their sincere pastoral intent. They truly operate from a place of centuries-old wisdom, recognizing that changes our reading of their eventual cruelty.
I think it makes their cruelty far more disturbing. It stems from a rigid defense of a worldview. It does not stem from personal malice.
Right.
They genuinely believe they are helping Job. They want to force him to confess a sin. They are certain he must have committed one.
Because the math requires it.
Exactly. They are trying to save his soul. They want to break his denial. Their pastoral intent is bound up in a theology that cannot accommodate innocent suffering.
Their cruelty is a byproduct of their theological certainty. You see this today in modern human behavior.
Oh, all the time.
When something terrible happens to a neighbor, we look for a reason. We say, well, he did not eat right, or she should not have been driving there. We do exactly what Job's friends do.
Because if we can blame the victim, we convince ourselves that we are safe.
Exactly. Job's friends cannot comfort Job without destroying their own understanding of the universe.
Which brings us to the first cycle of speeches. This spans chapters 4 through 14. Eliphaz is the first to speak. He opens in chapter 4.
And you can see that pastoral intent initially. He starts with genuine gentleness.
He does. He acknowledges Job's past righteousness. He reminds Job that Job himself historically instructed and strengthened others. Job comforted people who were suffering.
Eliphaz chooses his words carefully, but the theology surfaces almost immediately. He asks a rhetorical question. He asks if the innocent have ever perished.
He asks if the upright have ever been destroyed.
And his implied answer is no. He bases this on his own observation. Then he moves to support this claim. He shares a deeply eerie night vision.
That vision is incredibly unsettling. Eliphaz describes a spirit passing before his face. It makes the hair on his flesh stand up.
It is an unidentifiable form.
Right, there is a sense of sheer dread.
The tension there is thick. You have this dread-inducing, formless experience, yet Eliphaz extracts a remarkably tidy doctrinal conclusion from it.
Yeah, the voice in the vision asks a question. It asks whether a mortal can be more righteous than God. Eliphaz uses this to establish universal human sinfulness.
His conclusion is that no human is entirely pure.
Therefore, Job's suffering must be divine discipline. He ends his speech by telling Job not to despise the chastening of the Almighty.
Which is wild. Eliphaz takes a terrifying, ambiguous spiritual experience, and he uses it to underwrite a rigid system of cause and effect. He uses a ghost story to enforce a math equation.
It is a fascinating psychological move.
Job's immediate response to this comes in chapters 6 and 7. Job does not debate the theology point by point. He focuses entirely on the raw weight of his grief.
He says his affliction is heavier than the sand of the seas.
And Job does something structurally significant here. He turns away from Eliphaz. He addresses God directly.
Right, he bypasses the intermediary. He asks God directly why he is a target.
He uses highly ironic chaos camp imagery.
Remind the listener what chaos camp means in this context.
Chaos camp is the ancient mythic motif of the divine warrior. It is the motif of a god subduing chaotic sea monsters like Leviathan. Job asks God, am I the sea or a sea monster that you set a guard over me?
It's brilliant. Job contrasts cosmic mythology with his immediate reality. He is a frail, dying man. He sits in the ashes.
Right.
He asks why God treats a broken man as if he were a cosmic threat. God is acting like he needs divine surveillance to keep Job in check.
Job points out the absurdity of the scale. The response is totally disproportionate.
It is.
It is like calling in a military airstrike to deal with a moth. Job is saying, I am a dying man. Why are you treating me like a rival deity?
Which brings Bildad into the conversation in chapter 8. And his rhetorical strategy is entirely different from Eliphaz.
Eliphaz appealed to a personal, revelatory vision.
Right, but Bildad appeals to tradition. He points to the wisdom of the ancestors.
Bildad is the institutionalist. He tells Job to ask the former generations. He tells him to consider what the fathers searched out.
His authority is institutional. It is not personal. Therefore, his application of retributive theology is mechanically rigid.
It is Bildad who first suggests something devastating.
Yeah, he suggests directly that Job's children died because of their own transgressions.
That is a severe moment. He tells a grieving father that his children brought the roof down on their own heads. He tells Job they died because of their sins.
It is a harsh application of the theology. But Bildad is defending the system. The system requires consequence.
If the children died violently, they must have merited it.
The logic is inescapable for Bildad.
Job responds to Bildad in chapters 9 and 10. Job adopts a legal framework here. He realizes the absolute impossibility of a mortal contending with God in a courtroom.
Because he points out a stark reality. Even if he is completely innocent, God holds all the power.
God is the judge, God is the jury, God is the opposing counsel.
Exactly. Job articulates the power asymmetry. He maps the gulf between humanity and divinity. He knows he cannot win a case against an opponent who dictates the terms of reality.
This is where we see the first emergence of Job's desire for a mediator. He wants an arbiter. He wants someone who can level the playing field.
Right, he wants someone who could lay a hand on both of them. Job longs for a figure to adjudicate. He wants a referee between him and God.
This is a hypothetical figure at this point.
Very hypothetical. Job desperately wishes for this arbiter, but he's very clear he does not yet possess one.
Zophar speaks next. He closes out the first cycle in chapters 11 through 14. Zophar lacks the gentleness of early Eliphaz.
And he lacks the institutional detachment of Bildad.
Zophar relies on raw, aggressive assertion. He tells Job that God is actually punishing him less than his guilt deserves.
Zophar's position is absolute. Human sin is deep. God's wisdom is unsearchable. Job should consider himself lucky to be alive.
Zophar demands that Job put away his iniquity. He offers no space for nuance.
None. And Job's despair reaches a new depth here. He responds with biting sarcasm. He tells his friends, "No doubt, but ye are the people, and wisdom shall die with you."
He mocks their absolute certainty. He mocks their belief that they cornered the market on divine justice.
And then in chapter 14, Job meditates on the brevity of human life. He notes that a human is born of a woman. A human is a few days. A human is full of trouble.
It is a weighty meditation on mortality. He expresses a fleeting, wistful wish for renewal after death. He asks, if a man die, shall he live again?
But he immediately retreats from that hope.
Yeah, he looks at his current visible reality. He sees his rotting flesh. He feels his isolation. He concludes there is no return.
He wishes for it.
But he cannot sustain the hope. He relies on the empirical data in front of him.
Looking at this first cycle, we see dual tracks in Job's argument. On one track, he fiercely defends his personal innocence. He fights his friend's accusations.
Right.
On the other track, he begins to question the entire justice system of the universe.
Those two tracks have to converge. If Job defends his personal innocence, he implicates God's justice.
Exactly. If Job is innocent, then God is punishing an innocent man.
He cannot maintain his innocence without indicting the system. The second track becomes inevitable. And as we move into cycle 2, we see him shift. He moves from merely defending himself. He begins systematically dismantling the retributive framework.
Cycle 2 spans chapters 15 through 21. This is where we see the hardening of the friends.
And this is also where the Redeemer emerges.
Yes. So Eliphaz speaks again in chapter 15. The apologetic gentleness of chapter 4 is entirely gone.
Eliphaz is visibly offended. He accuses Job of intellectual arrogance. He asks Job if he was the first man ever born.
He asks if Job was present at the secret counsel of God. Eliphaz views Job's refusal to confess as a threat.
It is not just a theological error. It is a personal attack on piety itself.
So Eliphaz leans into a punitive description of the wicked man's fate. He describes the terror, he describes the darkness, he describes the destruction of the wicked man's house.
He does it with intense detail.
Oh, absolutely. And the subtext is unavoidable. Eliphaz describes Job's exact situation. He does it to force Job into submission.
Bildad and Zophar follow the exact same trajectory in chapters 18 and 20.
Bildad relentlessly focuses on the extinguishing of the wicked man's light. He talks about how the wicked man's memory will perish from the earth.
And Zophar ignores Job's arguments entirely. Zophar doubles down with visceral physical imagery. He talks about the wicked vomiting up the wealth they swallowed.
The implication sits heavily in the room. They imply Job is the wicked man. They are no longer comforting him, they are prosecuting him.
Job's escalation in chapters 16 and 17 directly addresses this prosecution. He explicitly labels them miserable comforters.
He points out a basic truth of human empathy. If the situation were reversed, he could easily string words together against them.
But instead, he would offer actual strength. He recognizes the total failure of their ministry.
The crucial evolution here is what happens to Job's idea of the arbiter.
Right. Back in chapter 9, he wished for a hypothetical mediator.
Now in chapter 16, he says, "Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and my record is on high."
The hypothetical arbiter becomes an actual advocate. Job believes this advocate genuinely exists.
This is a significant conceptual leap. Job moves from a desire for a fair hearing to a concrete declaration. He declares that a fair hearing is being recorded somewhere else.
It is being reported by someone else. The advocate is no longer just a wish. It is a fixed point in Job's mental landscape.
Which brings us to the core declaration of the book. It happens in chapter 19. We really need to set the scene of Job's profound social isolation before we look at the words.
Job describes himself as entirely alienated. His family has left him. His acquaintances are estranged. He says his breath is strange to his wife.
Even his own servants ignore him when he calls.
He is physically repulsive to everyone around him.
He describes absolute social death. He is cut off from every human network. He has no support. He has no identity in the community. He is entirely alone.
And out of that total isolation, he speaks. He says the words that carry enormous weight, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth."
Right.
Now, when my modern brain hears the word Redeemer, I instantly jump to the New Testament. I think of Jesus Christ. But Job sits in 1500 BC. He uses the Hebrew word goel. We have to strip away our modern assumptions for a moment. What did that concept actually mean to a man in that specific cultural context?
The term goel refers to a kinsman redeemer. It's a legal advocate. In ancient Israelite society, if you fell into debt, you might lose your land.
You might be murdered.
You might be captured, right? It was the goel who stepped in. The
Yep.
goel was your closest male relative. He had a
Yeah.
legal obligation. He had a familial obligation.
He had to buy back your land. He had to avenge your death. He had
Yeah.
to pay your ransom.
It is a profoundly relational term. It is a legal term. Job invokes a figure whose duty is to stand up in court. This figure must vindicate Job's name when Job can no longer do it himself.
Job is asking for family to step in when his actual family has abandoned him.
Exactly. Then we get to the intense grammatical ambiguity. It is in the subsequent phrase, "And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God."
The scholar Kin Leong So writes extensively on this. The Hebrew text here is notoriously difficult to pin down.
It really is.
What makes it so difficult to translate? What is the actual mechanical issue with the Hebrew?
Well, the ambiguity centers around the preposition attached to the word for flesh. It can be translated as "from my flesh." It can also be translated as "in my flesh." It can even be translated as "without my flesh."
What does that mean practically for Job's theology?
If we translate it as "from my flesh," it carries a specific meaning. It could mean Job expects to see God while he's still alive. He expects to look out from his current dying body and see God before he dies.
Okay, but what about the other option?
If we translate it as "apart from my flesh" or "without my flesh," it means something else. It means he expects vindication after he dies. He expects to see God as a disembodied spirit.
So maintains this scholarly tension. He does this because the Hebrew text alone does not explicitly detail a developed doctrine of bodily resurrection.
Right.
The text shows Job expressing a fierce hope. He has an urgent hope for an advocate who will clear his name. He has a conviction that he will somehow witness that vindication. But the precise mechanics of a bodily resurrection are not systematically defined in the Hebrew grammar of this specific verse. We cannot force the grammar to do more than it does.
We will return to this in the closing, though. How Latter-day Saints read this verse is a distinct topic.
But for now, we leave Job 19 with this intense declaration he claims an advocate.
Then, in chapter 21, Job shifts tactics entirely. He moves from his personal defense. He begins systematically dismantling the Friends' theology. This is the empirical challenge.
Job acts like a prosecuting attorney here. He points to the observable world. The core claim of their retributive theology is simple. The wicked suffer. The wicked die young.
And Job points out that this is empirically false. He says, look around. The wicked do grow old.
They do prosper.
They see their children established. They die peacefully. Their houses are safe from fear.
Job documents reality. He indicts the structure of their argument. He states that the moral order the Friends rely on does not exist in the observable world.
He tells them their theology is a fantasy. It is constructed to make them feel safe. The actual world is entirely indifferent to human righteousness.
It is a severe critique of conventional wisdom. Note the causal link here. The Friends refuse to hear Job's personal defense. They refuse to grant that he might be innocent.
Because they refuse to hear him on a personal level, Job is forced to empirically level their entire worldview.
This is the moment the book shifts. It moves from being a personal tragedy to a genuinely dangerous philosophical text. Job threatens the foundational assumptions of his society.
And that devastating critique forces the Friends into a corner.
Which brings us to Cycle 3. This spans chapters 22 through 27. This is where we witness the complete structural and theological collapse of the debate.
Eliphaz speaks for the third time in chapter 22, and he resorts to outright fabrication.
He does.
In his first two speeches, Eliphaz relied on general principles. He talked about human sinfulness in the abstract. He never accused Job of a specific crime. But here, he invents a concrete list of sins.
He accuses Job of specific actions. He says Job stripped the naked of their clothing. He says Job withheld water from the weary.
He claims Job sent widows away empty. He claims Job crushed the arms of the fatherless.
None of this is true. The prologue explicitly told us Job was blameless. The text established that fact before the dialogue even started.
So why does Eliphaz invent these specific crimes?
It is a textbook case of cognitive dissonance. The retributive system requires Job to have sinned. The system is a math equation. Suffering equals sin.
Job is suffering massively. Therefore, Job must have sinned massively. If Job is innocent, the system collapses.
Since Job maintains his innocence, Eliphaz has to fabricate facts. He has to save the theology. It is like a computer program encountering a fatal error. Eliphaz's worldview is crashing.
His brain literally invents fake data to force the theological equation to balance. He cannot allow the system to fail. He alters the data to fit the model.
It is an act of theological desperation.
Job responds in chapters 23 and 24. He delivers a severe social critique. He issues a renewed legal demand. He uses precise procedural language.
He longs for God's actual courtroom. He says he would order his case. He says he would fill his mouth with arguments. He genuinely believes God would be fair. He just needs God to be accessible.
Job's core complaint here is not that God is inherently unjust. His complaint is that God's justice is entirely inaccessible. Job cannot find the venue to present his evidence.
He is demanding this hearing, and while he waits, he expands his empirical challenge. He catalogs specific, observable economic injustices.
He acts as a witness to societal failure. He describes the poor being forced to glean in the fields of the wicked oppressors.
He talks about people laboring in the olive presses. He talks about people treading the wine presses. Yet these laborers suffer from thirst while they make the wine.
This is documentary detail. This is ancient labor exploitation.
It is the ancient equivalent of sweatshop labor. Job points to systemic, real-world exploitation. He uses this to prove that the Friends' localized theory is empirically false. God does not always punish the bad guys.
Job is highly specific here. He shows that God allows systemic economic injustice to continue unchecked. The wicked are not just prospering in a vacuum.
They prosper by actively exploiting the vulnerable.
And the heavens remain silent. Job brings the suffering of the broader world into his argument. He proves the Friends' theology is empirically bankrupt.
The Friends have no answer for this. In chapters 25 through 27, the structural collapse of the book happens. Bildad speaks. His speech is abnormally short. It is only 6 verses.
Bildad offers a weak restatement. He repeats that humans cannot be pure before God, but he completely ignores Job's catalog of systemic injustice.
He cannot address the sweatshops. He cannot address the oppressed laborers.
He retreats to a vague platitude.
Then we wait for Zophar. Zophar is supposed to speak next. That is the established pattern of the first 2 cycles. But Zophar does not speak at all.
The 3-cycle pattern completely breaks apart.
David Kleins highlights the scholarly debate around this silence. Is this a manuscript transmission error, or is it a deliberate literary choice?
It is a major textual puzzle. Some scholars argue it is an accident of history. They argue that parts of what should be Zophar's 3rd speech were misattributed.
They believe these parts were mixed into Job's subsequent speeches during the manuscript transmission process.
Scribes copying texts over centuries make errors. These scholars point to verses in chapters 26 and 27. Those verses sound far more like a Friends' retributive theology than Job's previous arguments.
It sounds like the text itself got scrambled.
But other scholars argue differently. They argue the missing speech is a deliberate literary choice. They argue the shortened Bildad speech is intentional.
The author is dramatizing the friends running out of arguments.
The text is physically representing their intellectual exhaustion.
We have to be comfortable with that textual uncertainty. We do not have the original autograph. We do not have the very first scroll. We have to read the text in its current final form.
And in that received form, the silence functions as an exhaustion of their position. The silence demonstrates that their theological system cannot sustain itself.
It shatters against the unrelenting reality of Job's suffering.
It shatters against his empirical observations. They simply run out of words. The silence of Zophar becomes the loudest argument in the entire book.
Cycle 3 ends with Job's oath of integrity in chapter 27. He swears that as long as his breath is in him, he will hold fast to his righteousness.
He will not let it go.
He sets the stage for his final, massive legal defense. We will see that defense in the coming chapters.
Job outlasts his friends. He defends his integrity. He dismantles their worldview. Now he stands in the wreckage of their theology. He still demands an audience with God.
We are going to shift gears now. I want to transition into a warmer, more personal reflection. I want to look at the themes we focus on in Come Follow Me. I want to circle back to Job 19. Let us reevaluate that chapter through the specific lens of the restored gospel.
We spent time earlier discussing the scholarly ambiguity. We discussed the term goel. We discussed the precise grammatical construction of, in my flesh I shall see God.
We must maintain academic honesty about what the Hebrew text can explicitly prove in its historical context.
We must.
But maintaining that honesty does not invalidate our reading. It does not invalidate the restoration practice of reading backward through modern revelation. When Latter-day Saints read this text, we bring the full weight of the restored gospel to it.
We read it knowing about the literal, physical resurrection of Jesus Christ.
That is a completely valid way to engage with Scripture. It is deeply meaningful. The beauty of this passage is not contingent on Job having a perfect, fully developed Latter-day Saint theology in 1500 BC.
The beauty lies in the tension. Job reaches for a living advocate. He reaches for bodily vindication. He does this before having the full doctrinal picture.
He is in the midst of total catastrophic suffering. He sits in the ashes. His skin is rotting. His friends accuse him.
He reaches into the dark. He grabs hold of this fierce hope. He demands an advocate who lives.
It forces us to define the nature of trust. Trust, as it appears in this text, is not a sunny disposition. It is not blind optimism. Trust is reaching past visible evidence.
Job does not have the empirical data to prove that God is on his side. Everything he can see suggests God is his enemy. Everything he feels suggests abandonment.
He makes a decision anyway. He decides that the relationship is more fundamental than the current horrific circumstances. He decides the existence of an advocate must be real.
That is the essence of faith.
Yeah.
It is trusting the unseen reality over the visible catastrophe.
We need to reflect on Job's deep social and physical isolation in chapter 19. He was alienated from his family. His breath was repulsive to his wife. His servants ignored him.
He was at the absolute bottom of human experience. He experienced total social death.
Let us connect this to the Latter-day Saint belief in a Savior who descended below all things. It changes how we view that isolation.
Christ is not just waiting on the other side of the trial. He is not just waiting for Job to get through it. The doctrine of descending below all things carries specific weight.
It means that Christ is already present in the exact isolation Job experiences.
Job reaches for an advocate. He reaches for an advocate who intimately understands the ashes. Christ knows the exact texture of that alienation.
There is also a very practical lesson here. We can extract it from the failure of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Job reaches his declaration in spite of his friends. Their tidy theological explanations almost crushed him.
Their need to explain his pain was toxic.
It is a warning. It is a warning about how we minister to people in deep grief. When loved ones suffer, the suffering often seems senseless.
We have an overwhelming urge to explain it. We want to find a reason. We want to protect our own worldview. We want to believe the universe is fair.
The most faithful response is often different. The most faithful response is often to just stay in the room with them, sit in the ashes, be silent.
We do not need to invent explanations to defend God. God can handle the ambiguity. We are the ones who struggle with it.
Job's friends failed at a specific moment. They failed when they stopped mourning with him. They failed when they started analyzing him.
It is a profound lesson for all of us.
Before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a final thought. Mull this over as you study this material on your own. We watched the complete collapse of human arguments today. We saw the silencing of the Friends. We saw the exhaustion of their retributive theology in Cycle 3. What if that collapse was necessary?
What if the complete failure of human explanation was the required prerequisite?
Did the human arguments have to fail before God could finally speak? Ask yourself that question. Could the whirlwind only arrive once the noise of human certainty had finally worn itself out?